Welcome everyone to another episode on the Double Triple podcast. But today we're talking about breaking down how exactly Matty Morgan went from hospitality and also getting into rippling as a SDR, but then smashing through the ranks there and getting into President's Club. I think a little bit of background that we're going to cover today is how did you go from hospitality into tech sales, breaking down the best practices for SDR and BDRs, crushing quota, also generating over 6 million in pipeline. So with all that, I'm sure we'll go in many different ways of tackling this conversation. But Matty, would love you to do a bit of an introduction of yourself and kick things off with what sparked your interest in tech sales.
Yeah, no, appreciate the warm intro. So nice to see everybody. My name is Matty Morgan. I am currently the founder of a business called Outbounder. We're basically a fractional go-to-market agency where we help businesses build more pipeline. But before that, I got my start in tech in July of 2023 with a business called Rippling. For those of you that don't know, Rippling is essentially a global HRIS or human resources information system or platform and a global payroll provider as well. So I got introduced to tech sales through a bunch of friends that had already made their start in the industry. So a few good friends were working at businesses of the likes of LinkedIn, AWS, Rejig, Safety Culture, DocuSign. And so transitioning out of hospitality, I knew that I wanted to work in sales in some capacity. And I just was lucky enough to fall into software or what we know as tech, and got my start at that business. So didn't really have a whole lot of interest prior to learning about tech sales. I just knew that there was a good opportunity in a fast moving industry. There was an opportunity to make some money, which is, why we essentially all work in sales. And then kind of the interest and the love for tech and AI kind of just built off the back of getting my start. And then I guess the rest is kind of history.
I feel like a lot of people, when they also hear tech sales, it's funny because I think it's a bit of a fancy word, but it is, you're in the industry of selling software. And I think, Maddie, when you were in hospitality, I feel like a lot of people feel like they need to have technical skills or know technology. But I really feel like there's a lot of soft skills that translate into getting into the industry. Before you made the move into tech sales, like what sort of skills or things do you feel like helped you from being even in hospitality before getting into tech?
Yeah, totally. Really good question. I feel like a lot of the skills are transferable, right? And most of that is to do with just being able to have a conversation and be able to build rapport naturally with people. Because at the end of the day, people are buying from people. So conversations just lend themselves to, the ability to like foster a conversation and just sort of like build out a positive relationship with that person that you're having a conversation with. Apart from that as well, being a business owner as well, because obviously the sort of like the cafe, of course it was in the industry of hospitality, but more so broadly speaking, just being a business owner itself, being resilient, being able to handle change, being able to have a strong work ethic, being able to turn up when you don't feel like it, all of those skills kind of translated across the sales. So as much as having a knowledge of tech or a passion for AI or these type of things, I don't think it's a prerequisite for being successful in sales. In fact, most of the people that I've seen that have had a really successful career in sales and specifically in tech sales haven't necessarily come from a technical or product sort of background. A lot of it has just been people who are willing to have a good conversation and people who are, have got a chip on their shoulder almost and are just willing to, throw themselves in the deep end.
100%. I totally agree with that. When it comes to like, you're obviously in hospitality and it sounds like you sold your business and it could have been like just like a perfect storm of like what's next. But when you had your mates in tech sales that were working in AWS and LinkedIn and stuff, like what was actually the draw card that made you go start applying for tech jobs and actually go and get a career in tech?
Yeah, really good question. The first thing, 100%, hearing some of the ridiculous on target earnings that some of these guys were making. I think I was, yeah, probably 23, just turned 24 when I heard about tech sales and the fast moving industry that it is. And I remember my friend telling me that he was pulling in like 3 grand a week, and I was just like, that number kind of just blew my mind at the time. I was like, wow, like these guys are earning more than most families, like most mum and dads that are, working in corporate as accountants or lawyers or whatever the case might be. So that was probably the first initial interest. And then on the back of that was just like an overall interest in technology itself. Like we use tools like deputy and square and light speed in and amongst tech. And so I was exposed to it in some capacity, but I would definitely say I would be lying if it wasn't initially the money was the big draw card at the start.
Yeah, totally. From my experience too, I was lucky enough, Gabe probably got into tech like a year before me. And so I remember so clearly like earning, I think it was just like under 3K after like tax I was making. And Gabe was making like 10K. And I just thought, because I think Gabe's amazing, I was like, I don't think I can be that because she's making that because, she's really smart and everything like that. And then she introduced me to someone. And not to say that they weren't smart, but I remember it was like the first person that literally showed me they made 600K in 1 year through tech sales. And like I didn't even know anyone that probably earned like 200K. Like I didn't think so, anyways. And so when I saw that, it just like lit this fire inside me, and I was definitely drawn to the money. But what was actually quite cool part of my discovery too is I didn't. I knew I liked like efficiency and productivity. I think like in my own lifestyle, but then when I got into tech, like selling like AI productivity and like software is almost just making you more productive. It like sparked this new interest in what I didn't know I liked about tech, which was also a really cool experience for myself getting into the industry. But great to hear, Maddie. That's like sort of your transition into tech sales and everything. Would love to know now. Like, there's obviously one part of here what I want the audience to hear, because a lot of folks that I'm talking to are breaking into the tech industry. Is what made you so successful from day one, getting into Rippling and making President's Club?
Um, Another really good question. I would say ultimately the key to success, there's a few things, but honestly, the first thing that comes to mind is I had initially started in an inbound role, not in outbound. So for you, those of you that don't know, an inbound role is basically responding to demo requests that come in through the website or potentially LinkedIn automation messages that get sent out, depending on how the organization structures it. You're essentially responding to inbound leads rather than going to market and trying to book opportunities on the back of cold prospecting. And so I think having that um, room to fail in a role that was a little bit less daunting was instrumental to my success because I had some grounds to fail. Um, on the back of that, I would say as well, outside of that, and then transitioning to outbound, um, I worked harder, plain and simply, honestly, than anyone in the business, and that just came down to volume, right? There's this thought of like, oh, raw volume doesn't automatically improve performance, but I disagree because it's the rate at which you're learning. And so if someone's making 30 calls a day and I'm making 60 or 80 calls a day, then the feedback loop is just so much better and so much quicker. And I can literally like every single call I'm getting better. And if I'm doing double the output that someone gets, then I'm ultimately getting better twice as quickly. And so those two things probably come to the top of my mind. And then the other thing that I would say is like, I don't know, I think you just got to have this like inclination to want to win. And I like really, really wanted to win. I'm super competitive, whether it comes to, sales. I think you have to be at least some level of competitive to be in sales and to thrive in sales, but also to um, beyond sales, whether it's football growing up, whether it's sport, whether it's in CrossFit, whether it's in triathlon. I know you're a big Ironman person. I did my own triathlon last year, and so I love the space. Anything to be able to push myself, I think that translates across to sales as well.
What did you find, Maddie? Did you find the inbound or the outbound the hardest role?
Yeah, I get this question a lot, especially from other SDRs that came into outbound. I actually found inbound way more difficult, to be honest, because of the sheer volume. Just to give you some like context, like Rippling as a business, I think they've been around for a decade now. I believe it was the first 6 or 7 years of the business. Don't quote me on this, but for the first half of the business was purely driven by inbound demand. And so the amount of volume that was coming into my Salesforce instance was just insane. Like I think we'd probably get anywhere between like, yeah, probably like I don't know, five to no, probably on the low end, probably like seven to 15 inbounds a day. And so just managing that, you can think at the end of the week, you've got like 45 demos that you've got to then qualify. And a lot of them too, like with inbound, unless it's a full-on demo request, a lot of them you kind of have to treat cold as well, because it might just be from some sort of LinkedIn message where you're offering them an incentive like a gift card. And so to be able to sort of qualify them as well as book them in, make sure they sit, um, the volume is just so much higher. So I actually found the inbound role a little bit more challenging.
What was your qualification method at Rippling? I know everyone has sort of a little bit of a different, maybe it's band or like medic or it's a bit more into the closing, but did you have a specific qualification criteria?
Yeah, so like on the outbound front or the inbound front, when it came to like sales development work, I think every business has their own framework, like you mentioned, MedPick or BANT or Challenger or all these types of frameworks. For the sales development role, it was more so just like understanding their headcount, understanding, what their current tech stack looks like, understanding why they're entertaining making a switch. So it was less, and I think there's this like this idea that you have to have all of this perfect qualification kind of ironed out. And I'm not really a big believer in that. I think just having a natural conversation, kind of understanding, just being a human, just understanding like why they would eventually join this call, also wanting to provide like as much context to the account executives as possible so that you're not just one of those SDRs where, you're kind of just sending over any opportunity is really, really important.
Well, one of the questions I wanted to ask, Maddie. So what I'm hearing is if you get a demo request come in, that doesn't mean it's a booked meeting.
Absolutely not. No, definitely not. A demo request is not a booked meeting. A lot of the time, if it is like a full on demo request, meaning they've come onto the website, they filled out their form, there's a good chance that that is going to convert, but it's just like you got to then follow up relentlessly. And most of the times, especially if you're selling into the C-suite, then they're not going to pick up their phone on their first and second, third time. So it's not a guarantee. And my thought process as well, and I think something that really helped me succeed as well, and thinking about maybe people that are trying to break into tech sales is my manager Ron always told me like treat it as cold, right? So just treat it as cold. Don't walk in there with like, hey, I saw you put in a demo request. It was still, using a permission based opener, still assuming that this person was somewhat like of a cold prospect, and not just assuming that you had the win under your belt. Was what I was always taught, and it kind of paid off
That's
in the
great.
end, I suppose.
What do you think, just in terms of more so the go-to-market engine? I'm curious. Like that is so many inbound leads that were coming in from Rippling. I also feel like they
Yeah.
were like really hot to market and everything. But was there anything that you feel like that was unique part of their go-to-market engine of like why they were getting so many inbound leads as well?
Yeah, so like I worked really closely with a guy named Noah Adelstein, who is just like an absolute wizard when it comes to all things go-to-market growth strategy. And they had a ton of market presence in the US, right? So like they almost were like in the same way that Zero kind of owns the market in Australia when it comes to payroll, Rippling kind of held that throne when it comes to HR and payroll software in the US. You've obviously got other players like Gusto and Deal, but the big value proposition of Rippling is that they are a true all-in-one, and so every business has got their own value proposition around like why they're different and why they hold a certain sentiment in market. But Rippling's value proposition was like everything was literally built for Rippling by Rippling users, so they didn't go and white label any tools as they grow. They didn't acquire any system. Everything was built under their own infrastructure. And so that value proposition was like pretty well known in the market. They also did a ton of like industry events in Australia. So they would do, HR events, they would do like tech events, they would do executive roundtables where we would invite like, heads of HR and chief financial officers or a specific persona we're going after, and host these like really nice dinners and lunches around the city as well. So it was very much like a relationship consultative driven go to market strategy, as well as raw volume as well.
Were the meetings that you were booking, were they like SMB or were they enterprise? What was sort of like the market that you were going after?
Yeah, so when I had just for some context as well. So right now, like current state, if you like to walk into the Rippling office in Sydney, there are specific segments of SDRs. So there are inbound SDRs, there are mid-market outbound SDRs. So we define mid-market between like 50 and 250, which is probably a little bit smaller compared to some organizations. And then enterprise for us was anywhere from like 300 north of that, and then SMB was sort of 50 employees and under. And so now there are specific SDRs for each segment. Then there's also global Australian based SDRs. And because they're like a global payroll product, they have New Zealand specialists and Singapore specialists as well that are specific to that region, and they work in pods with specific account executives. It's not like this at every organization, but as a business starts to mature, that's typically what happens.
Yep.
But when I first started, it was only myself and another SDR, and so it was evergreen. Like we could go after literally every business, and there was no named accounts, and I could just prospect into whatever, which was awesome
Yeah.
because yeah, I could just go after anything that I sort of wanted, and no one had dibs on it. So at the start, it was whatever, and then as I started, to progressing, I stayed in that mid market team. My thought process as well is like, depending on the organization that you work for, the company that you work for, your patch or what segment that you sell into is probably going to have some sort of dictation on the success that you have. Ultimately, people don't like to hear that, but that's the unfortunate truth. But in the same respect, some people use that as an excuse for their poor performance as well, which I don't believe in.
What the number one question I'm excited for you to dig into, there's obviously like LinkedIn to get leads or calling or texting or emailing. What was your favorite and what was like the most which funnel did you get the most meetings in?
Yeah, like probably like 99% of my meetings were booked over the phone, to be honest. I'm a big fan of like call first approach. I know that in the US that there's mixed feelings around this, and how successful a business can be when it comes to cold calling as a first approach, but that's all I've ever known. It's the only tech company that I've ever worked for, but I just saw how much meetings were booked, not just from my own end, but from the other SDRs were over the phone. So I would probably say around 80 to 85% of all meetings booked across the whole SDR organization in Rippling, Australia was booked over the phone. But that's not to say that LinkedIn and email is pointless, because of the 85%, I would say the broad majority of them had been touched either inside of an email sequence or some form of LinkedIn outreach as well. So, and that's what we do at Outbounder now as well, which is like we believe in multi-channel outreach. Not to say that LinkedIn and email aren't as important, but like a phone call is the only way you can literally just have a personal one-on-one conversation over the phone. You can get a yes or no. You can, get a sense check of like where they're at. It's not as black and white as an email, and you can have more of a conversation. And the next time that you do reach out to them over LinkedIn, it's going to be a lot more warm. So that's my opinion.
So what's like your actual so it sounds like you just call them straight away and you don't even like do an email or warm them up much. You might like call, maybe they don't answer, and then you do a bit more of like an email. But like how many times are you gonna call them or touch points to ultimately like you're not gonna get everyone on the phone, but like what's the numbers and metrics that you're putting out to get someone on the phone?
Yeah. So look, generally speaking, best practice for an SDR is your organization is going to have sequences set up for you, typically speaking. And so they'll have, for those of you that don't know, like a sequence is basically like an automated set of tasks, either across email, LinkedIn, or calling. Oftentimes they are put together, and basically you can enroll someone in a sequence. So let's just say Kayla is a business owner and I want to go after business owners. Then I would enroll Kayla in a sequence. And the first touch of that might be an email, and that might be a templatized email, and you might customize the first line. The second task might be a call. Day three might be another email. Day four might be a call. And so that the best practice is to enroll people into sequences. The only reason I would do that though is so that I could have more people to call. So I would literally just sequence as many people I can for the sole outcome being that I had more people to call. I was probably making like between 70 to 100 dials a day. Now, like you'd probably get a connect rate of maybe, you know, 12% on the low end and then maybe like 25% on a good day. So you're having to do a lot to get a response. But that's why I'm saying make those dials, because if you only make 30 dials, then you might only have like five conversations. So yeah, that was probably my North Star that I was working towards. But now with teams going in the opposite direction or a new direction, it's like a lot of the best go to market teams now are automating these sequences, and they're just wanting to give the time back to those SDRs to actually spend on the phone, where LinkedIn prospecting and research and copywriting can all be automated now, and just with the sole purpose of giving more time back to their SDRs to pick up the phone and have conversations to do social selling and things like that.
Absolutely, Maddie. What is some of your favorite tools at the moment that you're using for like AI or prospecting?
Yeah, there's so many out there. It's almost like overwhelming when it comes to like how many new tools are coming out to market. But just generally speaking, what we do is we'll initially build out lists inside of SalesNav and Apollo. We'll bring those tools across to a tool called Clay, and Clay is essentially like a tool that helps you. It's like a data aggregator tool where it has like data points from all over different providers. So tools like that can enrich for email addresses, tools that can bring you phone numbers, but also to give you access to important data sets that might be relevant to the type of people that you're reaching out to. So whether that's funding details, whether that's new hiring activity, whether that's certain technology that they use in their business that could inform why they might be a good prospect for yourself or for your business. And then once those mass amounts of research are done inside of Clay, and once we segment those lists out, we'll then export them to tools like Instantly, which is basically like a cold email tool. And then a LinkedIn tool that we're using at the moment is called HeyReach, which helps you, you know, send out connection requests, again, send out custom messages, like people's posts. But there's a whole bunch of tools like Ocean.io, Triggerfy, RB2B, which tells you like who's on your website. There's so many different tools out there, and I think you can get overwhelmed, but that's why I always go back to, if you're working as an SDR in one of these companies, you'll have access to what tech is given to you. And the best thing that you can do is like focus on what you can control, which is like sheer volume and getting better and, you know, having more conversations on the phone, I think.
Question for you that is probably now that you're probably out of the vendor world and you're running your own business, but let's say you're an SDR, because I'm actually getting this question a lot at the moment. Let's say you're an SDR or like an AE, could be anyone in the tech space. And you know how the vendors have their own bit of software that they have to use. And obviously there's like cybersecurity and regulations and policies around what tools you can actually use. But would you, like, let's say you're an SDR, would you go and invest in your own AI tools and do own like outreach to like expand that? Like, what are your thoughts around that now that you're out and doing your own thing?
Yes and no. So yes, from the perspective only because I would just do it not to have an edge necessarily over my peers or my colleagues, but more so just because I'm interested in tech and AI, and I want to stay at the forefront of those conversations because the space is literally changing like every single week. So like you kind of just have to be at the forefront of those technological changes and advancements. But no, from the perspective of like, at the end of the day, like tools gonna give you an edge to an already talented person or someone who's already successful. I don't think an SDR or an AE should think, oh, the more tools I have, the more effective I'm going to be. If you're scared to pick up the phone and you're not making $80 a day and you're just scared to have that conversation, then you can have the best freaking tools in the world, but it's not going to help you, I don't think.
Yeah. So you also made a LinkedIn post today, which I thought was very interesting. And there's like a two-part question to this, but it was the premise of the post was more SDRs doesn't equal more meetings, right? So we
Yes.
see obviously in 2018 issue you mentioned that I believe it was sheer volume, right? And you just added another headcount, another headcount. Now we're going through this AI wave. And so now companies are now investing in AI tools instead of probably putting more headcount in. What's your perspective on that? Like expand on that post that you made, but also do you think there's a place for SDRs in the next 5 years as well? It's a bit of a loaded question there.
Yeah, no, that's totally cool. So I guess like the thought process with my post and the initial motivation today was like more SDRs doesn't necessarily mean more meetings. And like what I saw at Rippling was, and I mean you can see this across so many different like areas of life. Pareto's principle, which is like the 80-20 rule, which like states that, roughly 80% of effects come from 20% of causes or inputs. And I'm a firm believer in this. It maybe wasn't exactly 80-20, but if we're looking the early days, like 80% of the demos probably came from the top 20% of SDRs. And I think you can see that as well in account executives, like 80% of revenue is probably coming from the top 20%, probably yourself and maybe Gabe in her organization or whoever else might be there. But I guess the other thing as well is like, we didn't have access to tools to be able to personalize at scale, to be able to build out lists at scale, to be able to get, these signals that we have at scale. And so if we can empower SDRs to have more time in direct conversations, like on the phone, or going out to these industry events and meeting people face to face, and getting rid of the mundane work of, like, because think about it now, like a standard flow in like 2018 or 2019, or even in some organizations today, which is like, okay, I have 500 accounts. I'm going to look at it in Salesforce or HubSpot. I'm going to just go through each account. I'm going to click on ABC company. I'm going to open up the contacts. I'm going to look at, the head of HR, the HR manager, the IT manager, and the CFO, because they're the type of personas that we want to go after in the business. And then I'm going to enroll each of them into sequence one by one. I'm going to look on their LinkedIn. I'm going to write a crafty, personalized line. And then, like, that's an hour gone on just like putting 10 people into a sequence. And if you can automate that based on real live signals and give your SDR enough time to pick up the phone and call that person, then you're essentially getting like 3 to 4x productivity on one person rather than hiring that person. And also too, you don't have to ramp an AI go-to-market tool. You don't have to like worry about if they're shit and have to pay their superannuation or cull them from the business if they're not performing. You just like remove your subscription to the tool. So I don't know. That's, I guess, the way I think about it. And I'm happy to like be proven wrong on this. I guess this is just what I've sort of seen and where the general sentiment of like go-to-market is kind of heading. And just the things that I'm hearing online and speaking to founders about all the time.
No, if you're not using AI, like even if you're like, I totally believe in that 80-20 rule. And even if you're that top like 20%, right? It's like if you're not using AI to get ahead, like you're just going to be like truly left behind. Like it's going to be so hard to catch up with this like gap at the moment. Um, Maddie, what I want to do as well, I want to chat a bit more about outbounder and some best tactics, but I'd like two more questions in terms of like
Yeah.
best practices for SDRs, what you've seen at your experience at Rippling. How do you best work with your account executive in a role? Because ultimately, like you mentioned it too. It's like it's very much in your patch and territory. But I also agree with you that just sheer like output and there's no excuse as well. But then there also is a factor of your account executive working with them is really important to get promoted or also book meetings as well. So what would you
Yeah.
say best practices are there?
Best practice is make sure that you like your AE, make sure that they like you. That's like the number one thing, man. Like I was such good mates with so many of like my account executives, like basically all of them. We were really lucky. We had such a good culture at Rippling, and sort of being there from the start and having other people join and growing with them was awesome. And like I love them. Like I went to President's Club with a couple of my AEs. Like we'd hang out sometimes on the weekends. Like we were just like literally mates, and then that made asking for an opportunity to get flipped or bumped so much easier when they actually like you, rather than being that annoying pesty SDR where you're just like, mate, fuck off, I'm not flipping this opportunity. It's shit. So that's
AEs
probably
did you look at? Like one time, how many AEs were you supporting?
like a bunch. It was kind of,
Yeah.
you broken into segments. So the way it worked was like on a router. So on like a Slack channel, you would see, or Chili Piper, who whatever tool that you might be using, who's like next up in the queue. And so yeah, we'd probably, when I was working mid market, there's probably like 5 mid-market reps. So but also too, there was like 12 SDRs. So it might go one SDR to that AA. It was just like whoever's next in the queue essentially. Outside of that, like you know, just looking out for their best interests. Like I always got a lot of like pride and satisfaction from being able to send over really quality opportunities that your A has actually a good chance of closing, or at least there's some interest from the prospect. And I sent one over which was T2. They ended up getting like closed by one of our enterprise A's at the time, Alan, one of my really good mates that I'm still really good friends with to today. And I remember him closing that and like him just calling me and thanking me. And I think it was like, it was a big deal. Like at the time, I can't remember exactly what it was. Probably like 300, 400K ARR. And he was wrapped, and like it was just he was stoked, and like I was stoked because I was like, fuck, that looks great for pipeline attribution, but also to deals getting converted. And yeah, it's just a good look from senior leadership when you're sending over good opportunities, and you've got the business's best interest at mind.
Why do you think you got promoted to an account executive?
It would have been unreasonable for it to be anyone else, honestly, just by sheer output. Like I really believe, well, not even I believe, like the stats were just like I was performing so much higher than any other SDR just based on opportunities sent over. Like I would create 12 13 opportunities a week sometimes, and the next person was trailing at like 5 or 6. Apart from that, it was also too just like I think I was like a good culture fit, but ultimately it sales is a performance basis. Now I'm not saying I could have sent over 12, 13 opportunities a week and been a dickhead and it would have been the same result, but also like maintained a good relationship with everyone there. Like I, didn't have any gripes with anyone at Rippling, but ultimately sales is a performance role. And then on top of that, just being a good person and being someone that like, if someone speaks about Matty or Kayla and you're not in the room, like what are the types of things that they're going to say about you? And that's less about sales and more just being a good person ultimately, which gets you
100%. Yeah.
further than anything else.
So that's what I tell SDRs. Like it's obviously time in role, and I always think like have that 2 year as a minimum in that role because it's like if you're trying to push it early, like if it comes earlier, amazing. But if it doesn't,
Mm,
like just hang in there because I think it's
yeah,
once you're an AE, right? No one can take that away from you, and then you're always going to be an account executive. But
yeah,
exactly, you got to hit metrics. You got to like have a good relationship with your account executive, and then your manager's got to see that you're ready for that next step and taking on more potentially initiatives, like even being like a bit more of like the team leader or again
totally.
being number one in there. So one question I'm really curious to hear from you is like, the first 90 days
Mhm.
as you're starting as a sales development representative in a company, what are your like best few tips for them to get started?
Okay. Go introduce yourself to cross-functional teams. So go introduce yourself to the marketing team, go introduce yourself to, the product team, to the finance team, to, the implementation team, customer success. Like just understand the business at a glance and kind of just map out in your head what everyone actually does in the business because it will help you when it comes to sales because you're just more comfortable having conversations beyond just the selfish thought of I need to get this demo in, and it just helps you have more conversations because naturally on some of these cold calls, people might ask about implementation. People might ask about, things that aren't necessarily directly in your remit. I would say go and listen to as many calls as you can, right? Like if your business is lucky enough where they have Gong or they have a tool that records your calls, listen to those calls. And then also go introduce yourself to like the top performers, right? And like see what they're doing best and emulate it, right? And also to like put time in your manager's calendars. Like I remember putting time in my manager's calendar when I first like became an SDR, and it was more just about getting live feedback. Salespeople learn from doing and not listening. As much as listening is important, you actually have to do the thing to get better. And so, doing mock calls sucks, but like you kind of have to do it. And then also too, just picking up the phone and just being able to like have the mindset and be of the belief that like you're gonna have to fail and fail fast and fail forward and like then you just get better because yeah, this thought of like I'll just chill and then like make a few calls and then I'll get better when the call gets made and when the meeting is booked. It's like, nah, that's backwards. You're gonna like mess up so many times. And so you just have to not be afraid of failure and like hear yourself on a call and cringe at that and be okay with that. And ultimately, like who gives a shit? Because like you can make some really good money and you can be better than anyone else, but you have to be shit at the start. Like that's just the reality.
Well, I'm really excited now to pivot into like outbounder because ultimately you've been really successful in tech sales and now you are almost like the go-to-market engine for companies that you're working with that are trying to find leads and therefore like you're setting meetings and then they're again closing, hundreds of thousands of dollars of deals based on the meetings and leads that you're booking for them. Now, when we spoke last week, which I was quite mind blown and I'm excited for you to start here, is that when you do get someone on the phone, you have a 65% success rate in closing them on the call, right? So can you dig into like some of the hacks around what you're doing for them to like, basically say yes to you to book a meeting?
Yeah. It comes with time. It does absolutely come with time and it comes with building the skill over that time. But there are a few best practices that I learned from my manager on, but a lot of his knowledge came from other organizations that he had worked with, but also to I love the show and the channel on YouTube, like 30 MPC, 30 Minutes to President's Club, which is a really good place to start when it comes to learning the art of cold calling, because I really believe that cold calling is an art. And using those skills and implementing those skills that they teach. And like one of those things is something that I've spoken about before, which is a permission based opener, which is essentially the technique of asking permission from the prospect asking them permission to essentially pitch, right? So it might sound something like, "Hey, Kayla, I know I'm calling you out of the blue. Do you mind if I grab a minute to explain why I'm calling?" And just that simple pattern interrupt, because a lot of these, C-suite or founders or really busy people that you might be prospecting into are getting a ton of cold calls every week. And they're usually hearing something like, "Hey, John, how are you?" And the person like just immediately knows that it's a cold call. Or they might say something like, "Hey, John," and just go straight into the pitch. And so they immediately have their walls up. They're immediately defensive and they know that it's a sales call. Whereas if you can break that pattern and lead with something like, "Hey," asking for permission, and you can change it up. There's different styles. You might say something like, "Hey, um, uh, uh, hey, I know I'm calling you out of the blue," or, "Hey, look, I've got some bad news," and then you're like, "Oh, what's the bad news?" And then, so anything that can kind of break up that typical pattern that you hear is probably going to give you a way higher chance of success, even if the meeting is not booked. The first thing is like getting an opportunity to pitch. Then once you've had the opportunity to pitch, you might say something like, "Look, I'm working really closely with founders of businesses that are struggling with their top of funnel. They've hired SDRs in the past that haven't been able to perform, and now they're looking at exploring alternative ways to be able to generate pipeline and revenue. Curious to understand if that's something that you guys might be looking into, or curious to understand if that resonates in any way." And what you're ultimately trying to do is just not be seen as someone inferior to them, but ultimately on their level. And then all of a sudden it goes from a sales pitch to someone of equal status, just having a conversation with them. And so that takes time, and it's much less about what you're saying and rather how you're saying it in your tonality and the way, like you can literally, you'd be surprised with things that you can get away with saying if you say it in a right way. Like I could say, "Hi, hey man, I'm absolutely fucking tired today," like on a cold call. And that person, like if you deliver it in a way that's like almost like funny and kind of just off the cuff and yeah, you'd be really surprised of the things that you can say if you say it in a manner that comes across as like friendly or yeah, I don't know, hard to explain.
Yeah, absolutely. When that's great advice too, Matty, is when you're now companies are working with you with Outbounder and
Mhm.
appreciate potentially when you're at Rippling, maybe it was more APAC focused, but do you have any words of wisdom? Because we have the audience listening that's quite global, whether it's in UK or America, etc. I appreciate there's different techniques or just different ways people like to be communicated. Do you have a bit of a viewpoint on the different regions across the globe?
Look, I don't know if I'm at liberty to sort of like have an opinion on that too much specifically because I've only, sold into Australia and New Zealand. But that channel that I gave a shout out just earlier, 30 Minutes to President's Club, they're US based. And so I found that that technique works in Australia and the US, but in terms of like local geographies and tying it to that specific region, I don't know. I guess like using your using your lingo. I think like the ultimate takeaway more than anything else from this whole ramble and this whole yeah, this whole thought process I have to how to have better conversations with people is, just leading with value, remaining calm, not getting too emotional when it comes to being desperate of wanting to get a certain result, and ultimately being of the mindset that like if I can help this person, then I will help that person, and not every call is going to result in a booked meeting. But yeah, I hope that kind of answers
Yeah,
some of your question.
no, that's great. So that's sort of like the calling aspect. I guess two more funnels I wanted to focus on was, I guess, LinkedIn and email. What are some of
Mhm.
the best ways that you're using LinkedIn to source information about people and therefore get enough information to potentially reach out to them?
Yeah, so I guess like a couple of things, like if are we talking about from the perspective of like an SDR prospecting into a specific account, like looking at someone's LinkedIn? Is that like the gist of
Yeah, I
it?
would say I'll reframe my question so it's a bit more clear. It's like, what value do you see from LinkedIn,
Mhm. Okay.
and what do you like about LinkedIn in terms from a prospecting perspective? And that could be from outbounder or an SDR.
Yeah, no, great question. From an SDR's perspective, I think like I did never spent more than like 5 minutes researching a prospect, right? Like I think some people, if you're in enterprise sales, it's a little bit more different. You're only got a finite number of accounts that you can prospect into. You're going to be way more strategic around mapping out the organization and making assumptions of who reports into who. But if we're talking like a volume game of like SMB or mid market, I just could never understand SDRs that would like research for like 20 to 25 minutes before picking up the phone and calling someone. Because if we're going off like the history of pickup rates, you could spend that 20 minutes and there's a good chance that person's not going to pick up the phone. And all of a sudden you've just done that for an hour and you've fucking prospected 3 people and haven't had a single conversation yet. So
Yeah.
my thought process was always, okay, who's the account I'm targeting? Get a quick sense check of where they're at as a business. What do they do? Explain that to me. Can I explain that in like 2 sentences as if I'm 15 years old? And then jump onto LinkedIn, see when they started at that business, what their role was before that organization, and look at their last 2 months worth of LinkedIn posts. And that's it, man. Like that is all you need to have a conversation. And I literally have a prompt in ChatGPT now, which is like, explain to me what this company does as if I'm 13 years old. Like literally, that's what I say to ChatGPT, just so that it can spit it back to me, so I understand what the business is doing. And that's all you need, man. Like what? How much personalization do you need to be able to pick up the phone? And it's all in your confidence and delivery. That's my thought process, at least. Again, like I said, enterprise a little bit different, way more strategic. You're thinking about who reports into who, and are they a technical buyer, and like all of these other factors that are gonna inform the way that your copy or email might look. But when it comes to doing what a regular SDR is doing, don't spend more than 5 minutes researching a prospect. It's just not
Yeah.
worth it.
It's great. Well, two questions to round out the podcast for today. You've provided great information. Two questions I wanted to ask was the first one: are you able to share someone that you know in tech sales? You don't have to say their name or anything like that, but the most money that you know of someone, what they've made in tech sales before?
Before I left, there was one guy who I'm good mates with, and he closed a monster deal. I think the deal itself was like 600K AUD, but depending on how your comm structure is set up and your incentives and your accelerators and things like that are gonna play a huge factor in how much money you end up making. But I think he ended up pulling in clear after tax like 160K on this one deal, which like he told me that and my jaw hit the floor and I was just like, fuck, why am I leaving?
Yeah. So he had the
Yeah.
base, and then he got 160K basically off the one deal he closed.
Yeah, yeah, off the one deal
Yeah.
he closed. But it's not uncommon for people to be clearing sort of like 30, 40K a month.
Yeah.
It's pretty standard. This other girl there had just been absolutely crushing it. I was in the channel team, so I didn't really enjoy the motion that of channel sales when I was an account executive, which was like selling through partners, and didn't really have as much direct control over my destiny as like a direct sales rep. But again, they were in the global team, and so the global team at Rippling is like it's a huge value proposition of why a business would come and look at Rippling, which is like, if you've got employees in 5 different countries, we can service that. And so the global team had a really great patch. That's not a knock on their ability. They're all obviously very good salespeople as well. But yeah, probably 160K off one deal clear to the pocket is probably the most I've seen. And then in terms of annual salary, yeah, like there's people on 7 figures in some of these big enterprise orgs, but yeah, anywhere from like sort of 250 to 500K is not normal, but it's very very achievable, and you'll see it pretty regularly.
Totally. Oh, and how did President's Club impact you as a person? And I guess before you made President's Club, like, were you really trying to achieve that? And just touch on a little bit about what that is, what it, sort of impacted you now as a person.
Yeah. Yeah, President's Club was fucking awesome. Like it was the best thing ever. Like it was so much fun. We went to Cabo in Mexico. It was 4 nights, and then I ended up staying a little bit longer in Mexico City, and I went to New York after. But the trip itself was 4 nights in Cabo San Lucas. We stayed at the Grand Marriott Bonvoy. It was best hotel ever. You're with other top performers from your business. Everyone's there to just like you know have some drinks, like you're hanging out on the water, like pool parties, like every business does it different. I think Salesforce does it like absolutely insane. Like people get like gifted like Tiffany diamonds, and like we're not as fortunate as that, but it was awesome. I knew I was sort of in the running. My VP of sales, Matt Loop, kind of gave me like, I don't know if he hinted it at me, but at our Christmas party in December of 2024, leading into 2025, he was like, "Oh yeah, President's Club is awesome, and like you get to do this, this, and this." And I was like, "Why is he like bringing this stuff up to me unless I've got a good shot at making it?" And then yeah, I found out in February, so end of fiscal year for like American organizations, that I had made it, and yeah, it was just like the best thing ever. Like I've never been to Mexico before. Everything was paid for. It was just it was awesome, and it just makes you like want to make it the year after.
Totally. It creates like this competitive, you want to be back there. And yeah, just
Totally.
to round out what President's Club is, it's just like a whole trip paid for if you hit your quota. So it's a big incentive, not only to hit your quota, but then to hang out with, yeah, the top 1% in the company that year is also like a really cool and special moment that I'll never forget personally in my career as well. Well, Maddie, thanks so much for having you join the pod. Really appreciate your time. You're the first guest. So I'll always be referring back to this episode, and it's a special memory for myself as well. So really appreciate your time.
Oh, wow. Full didn't know that. That's, man, what an honor. Thank you for having me. Appreciate that.
No worries, Maddie. We'll see you next time.
I'll see you next time.